And we are recording. So, going over the next and last part of this project. So obviously we're already in week 11, and really exercise 6 is kind of the last capstone for this, what I call the observation tower project. However, in our case, let's just go over it. Models always need its drawings, and beautiful drawings at that. As we wrap up our study models, it's best not to get lost in the madness of the digital file our design process can lead to. For our next exercise, you are assigned with taking your digital models and transcribing it as we have done before with the previous assignments. In our next tutorials, we will also be adding Adobe Photoshop to the workflow and add a touch of context for the project so that it fits into a studio project, what they would require. However, for this exercise, we will have creative freedom and is always encouraged when exploring the model. Now in our case, really we're just adding on a few of the final requirements, if you will, with final drawings, of course, floor plans, and that's maybe about 2 or 3 of them. Obviously there's not some real defined floor plans, if you will, but obviously we'll cover that today. One section is definitely required, and actually it says long and short. Really it should probably say both sections, but just one section is required. However, after what you see is available, at least in terms of tools today, you'll have no problem making an infinite amount of sections, or however your heart desires. And in some cases, I know some of us make some pretty unique models in studio, and sometimes we actually go the opposite way now. To be fair, traditionally, normally what happens in architecture at SAC is we design the floor plan, we design the section, we put them together, and we turn it into a 3-dimensional model. However, since about 2005 and the introduction of these digital model systems, guess what we do? We make the digital model first. Then we actually slice it up in order to make the section. We go backwards, essentially, right? Now we produce digital models and we produce drawings from them. However, what makes SAC so particularly strong is being able to do that, actually. How many of you guys took Professor Dwayne Boguslav's Graphics 2? Anybody? And it was probably the hardest class you ever took in your life, no? No? Good. Well, glad to hear it. However, I hear a majority of students struggle in that class, but at the same time get an ultimate skill. They can see it before they have to draw it now. And that is definitely one of those skills that arguably I don't think ever comes about in the computer. The computer does so much work for us that we often don't have to imagine what it could possibly look like. We just execute it and go, well, that's what it looks like. We edit, undo, and we try again, leaving the imagination kind of at the side view, if you will, right? So again, there's something definitely to it, and why we still teach analog, of course, at San Antonio College. In our case, we do also have our process diagrams. To be fair, that is exercise 3, just turned, and I'll go, of course, over that probably in part 3. And I do want to start explaining an exploded axonometric drawing just because it's so easy to do in Rhino. And then you have Grasshopper, you can turn it into a 45-45 oblique. Man, the stuff that we can do and the amount of speed that we can do it with this tool is just phenomenal. And the only reason we know that, again, is because we did it by hand, right? And we do realize how long even a drawing like this would take by hand. A lot of planning, a lot of coordination between parts and everything that goes into that. However, just to give us a basic overview, we are in week 11. Yes, topography model portion is due today. Get that on Miro if you don't have it already. Take a picture, just get it on there. And of course, introduction of exercise 6. Obviously, the final model, I'm pushing for it to be due this Thursday. To be fair, the entire project isn't due until next Tuesday. So there is technically 2 weeks from today. So if you don't finish the model, it's not the end of the world. However, it is just kind of a suggestion to get us on the ball. Some of us have already started working with the dowels and starting to put things together, so hats off to you. But now that studio is starting to at least slow down a little bit before it revs back up, maybe now's your chance to complete that model. Keep in mind that it is just a project model. It's not necessarily a final model that we're going to critique and oh man, you should have done this better. It's not that kind of critique, right? So again, it's really more about craft and what you did to execute and to make it look like it wasn't produced by either a laser cutter or a digital model. However, we'll continue on for today, but that is the assignment. I think for today I'm going to go at least over some of the workflow and some of the awesome tools that I have yet to show you, and maybe shown a couple of you through you just asking kind of the right questions at the time. So we'll go back to our original model, and yes, I have been keeping everything in this model. Please don't do what I'm doing, because you need a strong computer in order to do this all the time. But I'm going to go with what I completed in our last project, so I'm going to make a copy of this one. And again, go over some of the unique tools that we have now. So let's go ahead and hide all that and save some processing power. Can't express this enough, guys. Zoom Extents is your best friend, especially when you're trying to maneuver around these models and everything like that. Just making this screen a little bit bigger. Obviously, nobody needs to see my desktop all the time. So that's looking pretty good. From here, I do want to go over a couple of things. It's really calling out to make some floor plans, make some sections, and an exploded diagram. So let's definitely go over that first. And it is actually pretty simple. To be fair, one of the first commands I could go over is called clipping plane. And I don't think I've quite necessarily gone over this yet. It's kind of hard to remember. I show certain students this and certain not. In our case, clipping plane, once you activate that command, you'll basically make a plane. So in my case, I'll make a plane, and right away we see a section cut line with our traditional little arrows. In fact, you'll notice that it's kind of a component itself, and in many ways it's making a wonderful model. To be fair, this is kind of a new feature of Rhino in itself, and let me tell you, quite the game changer. In fact, it even reveals that my model isn't exactly finished, right? As you can see, didn't quite cut through, and maybe I actually copied the wrong one, my bad. Let's actually find out. Show, did I copy the wrong one? Hopefully not. You'll also see that it's still clipping planes the rest of everything else. Be very careful. Don't accidentally hide a clipping plane, because it's very easy to lose it. I mean, at the same time, you'll realize stuff is cut off, right? And you'll be like, where is everything? And then you'll maybe remember that you had clipping plane enacted. Another issue that comes up is, well, sir, I have clipping plane and it's showing in my perspective view, but it's maybe not showing in any other view. Why not, right? Well, by default, it only adheres to the clipping plane view that you selected. So for instance, you have to click on the plane itself, go over to your properties, and you'll see that you have a couple of more options. So for instance, right now it's only enacted in my perspective view. Right now you'll see that, hey, it's not affecting my top view yet. So of course, once I click on top, of course it affected that view. Once I hit on front and right, now of course we see it affecting those viewports. So be very careful, right? As soon as that you're using clipping plane, it does have a couple of options to it. From there, as you can imagine, we're going to derive our floor plans, right? So this is what I meant when I said we come up with a digital model first and then we derive the drawings from it. Not emojis, I'm sorry. Wrong key. But in our case, we can move the clipping plane. It doesn't really do much unless I move it in the Z-axis, right? But as you can see, we can literally count every single stair, and we can really get into the minutia of these pieces. In my case, I want to quote-unquote make a first floor plan, so I'm going to go with kind of my first stopping point, which is maybe about right there, right? Obviously, we're going up the stairs a little bit here, and if you're doing this, that is not the way to do it. Click on an object and of course zoom select, and it's much easier to manipulate. But it's looking pretty good, and yeah, I've got some stuff in the way. Obviously, I think this is the model that I didn't complete everything, and that's okay for today. In my case, I'm going to take that group though and ungroup it. That way I can mess around with some things and get it out of the way, or at least delete it for today, or obviously get out of the way of the stairs. Well, we'll just delete that for today. But more or less, obviously you won't have these things in the way. Let me just find the actual model. Where's the one that let's turn my clipping plane off. So in my case, you can turn it off from a view as well, which is very helpful. But let's go with the one that I actually manipulated and went ahead and fixed. I did all that work, and if I'm not going to use it, what's the point, right? This one doesn't seem to have the topography involved. That's okay, I can kind of fake it till I make it. Oh yeah, that's right, I destroyed it in order to make this model. That's okay. We'll copy it for today. And just kind of move that across. Theoretically, it should more or less kind of get there. Let's get rid of that one. And I think that's the much more complete model. I don't know, it's kind of missing something. No? Maybe I never completed the model. Am I losing my mind? Maybe I destroyed it. And this is a good reason why you should always make a copy of something. So that way you don't have to basically do the work again like I'm doing today for this tutorial. Maybe just a good life lesson right there, right? Anyway, let's hide the rest because it will get eventually in the way and look somewhat confusing, especially with clipping plane. So again, we'll just keep on trucking for today. But in my case, I do need to establish a floor plan, a section, and an axonometric. And I also want to show you how to get it into Photoshop. That way, for part 2, we can just dive right into Photoshop. So really, we need a baseline, a coloring book, if you will, of this situation. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and go to my top view and make 2D of that now section cut view. So make sure that it is being section cut, and we can get those pieces. Another great way to look at it is actually the shaded view, and it's going to start more or less starting to look like a floor plan. In my case, I'll take everything and make 2D. Awesome. Maintain layers, huge component there. You don't really need hidden lines in a floor plan unless there's something above you. However, in this case, nothing is technically above us, so it's not going to magically get those things. Be aware of that. I'm going to press apply. Of course, it's going to make our first floor plan. And man, look at that. It's already got everything. However, it is missing some information, and I do believe that's because of my layers are not on. So do make sure that at least on Make 2D, that of course all your layers are on. But that's looking pretty sweet. And as you can see, it kind of looks like there's a void in there. What's going on there? Maybe it didn't get this piece. Make sure that you do get everything. I'm just going to double check and verify. Make 2D. Top. Group output. Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah, definitely want that. View, C-plane. Well, yeah, maintain that. Tangent edges, yes. Hidden lines, no. Clipping plane interactions, yes. So notice some options like come about when, right? And let's take a look at the two. Yeah, clearly one is more finished than the other, no? So make sure that you do have those options on. And in our case, we are using clipping plane, so make sure that clipping plane box is checked. That way you actually get some stuff in there. And let's go ahead and, of course, get rid of that one. Now we can add some text and call it floor plan. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not completely finished, but it is a heck of a start, right? I mean, what a different way to, of course, make a floor plan. Let's do the same thing for another floor plan in another section. In my case, I'll just move this up. Maybe we get a midpoint of some kind. That's actually looking pretty sweet. A lot going on there. Yeah, this is definitely the model that I didn't refine. In your case, it'll look much more refined, hopefully. And you won't have a random thing like that in the way. But, again, make 2D. Clipping plane, apply. And there's floor plan 2. Now, of course, floor plans are right above the next floor plan. We'll take that one, copy, floor plan 2. Now, in most cases, you could probably get away with kind of a schematic design, right? And be like, yeah, this is floor plan 2. But to be fair, it's missing a lot of things, right? I mean, for instance, oh man, where'd the stairs go? Right, those kinds of things. So obviously my stair layer needs to get involved, and clearly it's not. So right now it does look like it's grouped. And keep in mind, Make 2D doesn't always work on groups or even exploded objects. So again, I'd have to ungroup this first and make sure that I get each of those individual pieces, right? So again, maybe these aren't quite as finished yet. Let's try that again. Take my piece and scroll down just a little bit. I kind of like that that piece going on right there. That'll be my mid floor. Keep in mind there's not really floors, right? But a floor plan really is a section just in a different view orientation. But let's, for the sake of today and at least tutorial, obviously make sure you got everything there, right? But let's try and get those stairs involved. Make 2D. Maintain some layers. Scene silhouette. Honestly, I don't know what that is. I'm kind of interested. There we go. Ah, and there's those magical stairs. So again, make sure you don't have grouped objects, and you definitely will get some better results. But I kind of like to show the error as well, right? That way you can kind of see that, oh yeah, you know, I'm getting the same errors, or what we perceive as errors. Really, they're just instances where it's not doing what we want. However, keep in mind, we don't have to keep everything here, and we could still actually go in and fix everything, right? Obviously, it's all still nice and layered, so I can take this into Illustrator and apply line weight. However, I'd also maybe even want to add a new layer and call it annotations. Why? Well, because I know as a good architecture SAC student, I know that my work here isn't complete until I've definitely put an up arrow for Professor Barrett. Now, in my case, I can still fix things, right? If things are absolutely wrong, I can still fix them. Now, in my case, everything is grouped, so I do need to ungroup it. And of course, fix these things. And there's many ways to fix them. You can just extend lines, you can of course make new lines, you can still delete lines, but you definitely want to do this a part of our workflow, right? That way, of course, I mean, don't get me wrong, this is a great base to start off with, but it's not just a one-all, click-all, all done, right? Just because you use Make 2D doesn't mean that it's actually completely done. In fact, we could even go in some more and we can add text to each of these. I could say 0 feet here, right? I could copy. I could say 1 foot. Why? I mean, we could really expand on the graphics, and we are often taught to in our design studios. So by all means, you can still add that graphic information. What else do we always need on a floor plan? North arrow, thank you. Right, and that's super easy to draw now. I just take a center point, bam, center point, and maybe that's my north arrow. By all means, right? In my case, you'd have to actually click on near for that. And there we go. What? Where'd it go? There we go. So of course you can do all those things still, and to be completely honest, it's way easier to draw them in Rhino and not necessarily in our next workflow, Illustrator, before we go into Photoshop. So again, just to recap, let's get a section involved. How do I do a section? Well, gumball this guy. He can go any direction. Look at that. If you ever wanted to look at what a diagonal section of your model looked like, not that you would ever need to, but yeah, I can do that too, right? It really is a section view, right? So in my case, I'm going to hold shift to make sure that it's a perfect 90. But again, the same things. And you know, that might not be the best section to communicate in my drawing. So again, what's really nice about this, guys, is I can really decide which is the best view or section that I want to show potentially. I don't know, maybe it's that right there. Maybe I want to cut directly through the stair and cut directly through the ramp to really show off those pieces. Maybe that's not the best view. Maybe let's rotate it 90 degrees and move it again. Maybe that's a better view. Maybe we do all three and we can really find out which is the best view. But what I would suggest is, of course, let's get something spatial. We all know that half of it's going to be basically an elevation and half of it's essentially going to be a section. So in my case, make sure you're cutting through something that, again, communicates what's going on. In our case, I'm cutting through the ramp at the bottom, and in my case, I got a lot of extra stuff going on, so let's get rid of some of that stuff. Obviously, this is the one where I didn't get to change anything, so let's get some things out of the way so they at least look like they're about to work. Yeah, and this is definitely not working. In your case, you shouldn't have all these issues, and maybe it actually, when you're doing the clipping plan, it reveals actually some of the things that you didn't actually see maybe at first, right? So you can use clipping plane as a tool itself. It's not really affecting the model. However, I'd still make a copy, right, just in case. But that's looking like a pretty sweet section. It's cutting through some of those I-beams, it's cutting through some of these volumes, and it's cutting through the stair. I'd say that's pretty good. Let's find the view in which it exists, and it looks like it's either going to be the right or left view. So let's maybe go with the left. Nope, not quite. I'm going to have to look at my model. That's the view I want. Maybe it's the back view? Let's go with the back view. Oh, maybe not. Oh, maybe. Survey says... Oh, I got the opposite. Not quite, not quite. It's alright, there's only so many views we can go through. Well, I don't think it's the bottom. Let's try the left. It's the opposite, but... Oh, okay, maybe it's the right. Ah, there we go. Right, so obviously I'm just matching it up with the section cut in place, right? But I'll essentially make 2D out of this one. So we'll take all that. And I'll make sure that it's just that. It's looking sweet. Make sure you click on the viewport before you make 2D. And let's get rid of whatever the heck that is. There we go. Make 2D. Of course, all those are by default the same if you keep using them. But keep in mind, your clipping plane will do stuff like this. Like, it's not actually gone, right? Be careful, all right? Clipping plane can be very deceiving. And in some cases, some students will actually just turn it off in certain viewports. That way it doesn't get in the way. But bam, look at that. Section done. Well, not quite, right? But at least it's a really good base. But keep in mind, you can't also place stuff in a section cut view. It's just, it's there, but it's not seen, right? But again, what's really nice about that, I don't have to change the scale, I don't have to change anything there. And don't get me wrong, if you hide it, be careful. It's still going to be enacted, right? So the best way to do that is, again, to go properties and just turn it off, right, from the actual view itself. I usually just kind of leave it there. But that's looking pretty good. Last but not least, let's go over an exploded axon. And that one's actually pretty simple. But in this case, I'm going to make a copy, because I am going to move the model, and let's face it, anytime that you start moving the model, you definitely want to make a copy, because it's kind of hard to move stuff back. But in my case, I want to separate and start to more or less kind of make an exploded model. And what we use for exploded axonometrics is not only because they look super cool and they look kind of technical and complex, and it really starts to maybe even communicate that you know what you're doing, even though sometimes, let's face it guys, in studio we're like, I don't know what I'm doing, right? But in our case, the graphic communication that this allows is pretty unique, right? We can really separate the parts, and to be fair, it's way easier to do in Rhino compared to physically or by analog or drafting. A lot more planning and skill, at least I would say. But in our case, we have the topography at the bottom, we got maybe some rooms and spaces, and obviously the different categories that are going on, followed by maybe skin at the very last. In our case, obviously we have some different parts such as topography, some grids, stairs, and vertical components versus horizontal components. So, I mean, we could really start to make a unique diagram that again starts to explain really the chaos and the unique abstractions that all of us made. So in my case, I'd maybe want to start separating the parts, but I'd also want to maybe establish the view that I want to go for as well first. So in my case, maybe set the view to some sort of isometric view. So in my case, yeah, something that even arguably looks a little bit more axonometric. That way I can start to decide, is that enough space? So for instance, that's going to be my bottom. And I think I'm going to go with maybe my stairs at the top along with my rails. So yeah, I might have to select one thing at a time, or for instance, I'd work smarter, not harder, and turn off layers that I don't need. So for instance, ooh, there's a layer I need. I'm going to go ahead and move that up, or move that out, right? That is another option I could do too. I can move it out. And let's turn those back on. Ooh, okay. So I can draw some lines potentially right to that. Of course, in a make 2D situation. Next one, all right. I don't actually need this layer, and I thought I got rid of it. But as you can see, we can go through this one by one. We can turn all those layers back on. And as you can see, I have a bunch of stuff that I don't need, like all these grids. Obviously, I don't want to make 2D some of this stuff because it's just going to get in the way and it's not necessarily needed. But yes, I would go through basically each one. I could turn off make 2D, but it's not having an effect on that. And again, another way to go through it is just to turn off one light bulb at a time. And ooh, there's a piece I need. So turn off everything but that. And turn off everything but that. And there we have that piece. And maybe I extend that out. Maybe I want the structure to kind of be involved. I'm not sure. So that's looking pretty sweet. Again, let's turn them all back on for dramatic effect. Alright, let's get somewhere. Maybe I take the stairs out, or maybe I leave the grids in, I'm not sure. But I think you can kind of get the picture. You can definitely separate some of this stuff, and of course further refine, in my case, the stuff that I don't need. Such as the original two-dimensional lines, right? Definitely starts to really get in the way. But from here, we make 2D. Now, I kind of want to complete the diagram, so I'm going to take out some of these pieces. Everything but that red piece. Turn it off. Let's turn off those. Well, dang, did I put everything in this layer? My bad. Yep, I guess I totally did. Don't do that, right? Because then you'll have to do what I'm doing right now and turn it into a new layer. That's okay too. Fake it till you make it. No, don't take that one. Kind of want to get rid of my structure if you were, or treat it as a separate component. So in my case, I'm going to move this one out over here. There we go. And turn everything back on. Boop. There we go. It's starting to look like a healthy diagram. Don't get me wrong, we're kind of in still like a spatial mode. But at least as long as I was very well organized, right, this would actually have been a much simpler process. So if you're very organized, that might be a much easier diagram to make. From here, then I make 2D. And boy, is it going to be a crazy make 2D. Probably wouldn't recommend the hidden lines in this situation because it's going to be atrocious. But tangent edges, we don't really need the clipping plane anymore. It's not going to really have an effect if you accidentally have it on though. But in our case, it'll produce that. We'll give it a second. And like I said, the more stuff that you make 2D, of course, the longer that it takes. But as it's doing that, it gives me a moment of time to talk about actually what we're doing for this. Now, it says the final drawings, but really they're all supposed to be on a portrait 11 by 17. So don't get me wrong, we do all of our drawing in Rhino. We do all of our accuracy in Rhino. So it makes a lot of sense to even make all of the artboards that we're about to use in Illustrator and move to Photoshop in Rhino. All right, so in our case, that make 2D has taken a little while. A lot of lines going on. It always stops at 98%. I always wonder what it's doing for that last 2%. There's just a hamster wheel inside the computer maybe. We'll give it a second. But naturally what we're trying to do is of course create a workflow and get this into Illustrator so we can change his line weights first and then just literally drag that into Photoshop. Well, let's try that again. It seems to be struggling a little bit. And it does struggle a little bit, especially when you have a grouped object. So I didn't double check and make sure that I have no grouped objects. Also, it just kind of naturally looks like it's freezing. So honestly, on the Mac, the worst thing you can do is click. If you see the wheel of death, don't click. Because usually you can just kind of get out of it, right? But as soon as you click, it's not responding anymore. Anyway. Word to the wise. But in our case, I'm going to ungroup just in case. And go ahead and try that again. So make 2D. I'm also maybe turn off some more options. So group output, I kind of want that. Maintain source layers, yeah, definitely kind of want that. So can't get rid of too many options. It's definitely trying. It's definitely moving. 96. 90. Okay, it only made it to 96 this time. Yeah, I have a feeling it's probably that. That's chaos, right? There's a lot to dissect in that. I may want to even turn off my rails at this point, and even make that in make 2D in two separate occasions and just overlay them. Now, obviously, you won't be recording your screen and using a large, probably majority of your graphics card just in doing this. But a lot of the times my Make 2D does kind of mess up, especially when I'm recording. It's just kind of the name of the game. The computer's overworking. But at least in my case, I think you should more or less kind of get the picture of what's going on here. But man, it's really struggling. View projection. Come on, man, you can do it. I believe in you. I'm really surprised it's actually letting me move while I'm doing Make 2D. Usually that was never the case. However, I'm going to have to cancel, at least for the sake of tutorial speed. Let's just assume that it did produce something, more or less. But in our case, we do need to move on a little bit, just because we are running out of time. We have about 15 minutes left. Hang in there. But let's say I did make 2D of this situation, and I had everything ready to go. Essentially what I want to do is, again, that rectangle, that magic rectangle, I should coin it. I should trademark it. We'll call it basically our 11 by 17 tabloid piece of paper, and I'll go ahead and align my drawings here first, right? So for instance, I need basically that ratio, so 11 feet by 17 feet, 17 feet by 11 feet. More or less, I just need that ratio at first, right? Or wait, oh no. I can't just do a ratio and stick it in there, can I? Because it needs to be a specific scale. So we need to go ahead and make our magic rectangle, that's right. So I'm going to do 11 times 8 because I'm going to be at 1/8 scale, so that's 88 feet. By, well, 17 times 8, which I can't do in my head this morning. So 17 times 8 is 136 feet. That's the magical ratio, right? And my paper space, that would be an 11 by 17 at 1/8 scale. And as you can see, we can practically fit 2 plans on there. Look at that. Beautiful. So it is going to fit 2 plans. Arguably, I wish it would fit 3. And to be fair, if you even wanted to separate it into multiple pages, that would be absolutely fine as well, right? You could even probably jump scale if you wanted to turn that into a 1/4 scale. You could do that potentially, but let's more or less kind of line up the board and kind of assume as if we were pinning it up, right? This is kind of my pin up space, if you will. So in my case, we could probably fit about 4, and we'll probably have about 6, and followed by the model at the end, right? So obviously maybe I want to set up my floor plans. Yeah, you know, I bet I could fit 2 on here. Not too shabby. Maybe a 3rd one. Maybe get a section in there. Oops. My bad, my bad. But we definitely want to set those up first. And as you can see, oh wait, you know, I think something's off about that scale. Oh, there's supposed to be a 1/4 scale. Oh, all right. Why didn't you guys tell me? I kind of did that one on purpose. That way you could actually see that the differences between that we're really just changing the rectangle. In fact, I think we can actually reduce this scale by 50%. So if you type in scale and you click a base point and you click on another and you say reduce by 50%. So 50%, enter. Ah, man, doesn't do that on this one. You can also use the midpoint, and that's going to give us the right scale as well. Oh, there's 1/4 scale. That's looking a little bit more realistic. So wow, oh man, what do I do? Trim it, right? TRIM, and get rid of what you don't need. Now obviously it's not going to trim lines that don't interact with the surface. And it is still grouped, so I do want to ungroup it first. You can still trim with group, which also used to not be the case. But yeah, more or less, we can establish that here first. So again, I don't have to increase the size of my drawing or my Make 2D. Again, that can be very confusing. It would just be this piece right here at 1/4 scale. However, by the time we get to the second floor, do I show my topography? No. Why? Because it's below us. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this is actually the first floor plan. I think I mixed mine up. But again, we can do all that alignment here. We can set up the page here, right? And get it absolutely ready to take into Illustrator. Which in itself can take some time. But arguably, we're saving a lot of time here and using it elsewhere. Ooh, that section's looking good now. It's gonna fill up the whole page, at least a little bit, right? I'd maybe want to center it. How do I center it? Well, I take the midpoint of something and I hit it to the midpoint. And then, of course, trim. TRIM. I do think these are groups, so I'm going to have the same issue, but that's okay. And, of course, get rid of what we don't need. And in my case, I got that weird group thing going on. So, again, ungroup. And get rid of what you don't need. However, let's say I was finished, right? There's my axon. Just pretend that my Make 2D worked today. Now we'd want to take this entire piece into Illustrator. It doesn't make any sense, especially if we were super organized and we got all of our layers and they're essentially the same layers. And I'm essentially showing even the same things, such as maybe I even want the grids to be a certain color or I want this aspect to be a certain thing. It doesn't make sense to do this all one at a time. Do it all together, right? So essentially from here, we'll take the whole thing. File, export selected, as you guys know. I personally like the DWG method. However, I've heard there's some success with the AI file, and that's good. So Adobe Illustrator file, you know, whatever's your preference or whatever's working best for your computer. Totally fine. In my case, I'm going to go with a test setup, exercise 6, and just go ahead and put that on my desktop. We'll export it as 2007 lines. And we'll go ahead and open it up in Illustrator before we do the magic plot twist to Photoshop. We'll go ahead and open it up here. Obviously that test DWG. And I will scale to fit artboard because it doesn't really matter in this case. I have my magic rectangles. So in my case, scale to fit artboard, and it's pretty bad, right? One of the first things I'll do here, because I can, is a document setup. Edit artboards. And of course change this to an 11 by 17. It already is one, but just in the wrong direction. So 11 by 17. Sweet. And I could make another one. And I could make another one. Reminds me of that, who's that rap guy who's like, another one? Yeah, who is it? DJ Khaled. There you go. But yeah, obviously, I mean, you can kind of ballpark it a little bit, but then you have to kind of go back in and, you know, dial it in just right. And as you can see, once you get their dimensions, they move around a little bit sometimes. And that's okay too. But we need the right dimension, and just move it accordingly. I like to get them pretty close. I kind of pretend that I'm pinning them up, if you will. Something like that. But from here, then you take each one and you do it really all simultaneously. So don't get me wrong, it doesn't make sense to just scale one of them either, right? In fact, as soon as I get one, technically the other three are correct. As long as I hold shift, by the way. So again, let's just match one of these. So just that outside rectangle. And if it is starting to get really confusing, of course you can separate them anytime. Right? But I like to dial it in. And we should actually be able to get pretty close here. Wham. Not quite. And I may actually want to separate them, just because it is getting a little confusing, and I do want to make sure that I dial these in. And it's just so close. Bam. There we go. But yeah, you definitely want to verify that they are perfect, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. If you delete the rectangle, nobody's going to know, right? Nobody's going to kind of go in there. But again, I should have drew my graphic scales first. I should have drew a lot of other things, my up arrows, my poche on some cases. I should have hashed some things. So don't get me wrong, this isn't the tutorial to like follow, but really just for the sake of training the software itself. But again, what a workflow. Now I'm working on 4 drawings at once instead of just 1 at once. And again, all I'd have to do is change the layers one by one, take everything, change it. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Just because honestly, that's my favorite, like, that's my American pastime right there. It's just changing layers. It's just so easy. You click on the invisible box, call it a day, give it some line weight. Can't tell you how many times I've done this right before a studio pinup, right? You have like 30 minutes left. You guys all know what I'm talking about, right? The lunch hour, right? And you're panicking a little bit and you're like, man, how am I gonna, I finished my model, but I need to make some really quick drawings. And maybe if I didn't talk as much as Professor Verret, I'd actually get done, But as you can see, we're getting 4 drawings done at once, which is just incredible. It'd be like the equivalent of having 4 draftsmen, right, at a single given time. And I have a lot of layers, as you can see. But this is really important because I'd have to do this first before I want to get into Illustrator, or sorry, into Photoshop. To be fair though, I probably would do 1 at a time in Photoshop. But again, I kind of use this as my base model, if you will. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Because from here, let's say I was finished and I got everything done. And as you can see, I think my artboard's a little short on that one. So let's go ahead and fix that artboard real quick, because that's the one I do want to talk about today. I like the section. Probably section's my favorite part of architecture in general. I can thank Bowasoft for that one. As you can see, as soon as you move the artboard, it does move the whole thing. Don't be too alarmed. You can always move it right back. Obviously, make sure you get everything. And then get that right back in there. But let's say I was done with the line weight, and I am clearly not, by the way. But let's say I was. I would essentially take in 1 at a time. And to be fair, Photoshop doesn't have the same excellence, right? Where you can kind of work on 4 pieces at a single given time. So in my case, I do want to use a new file. I'm going to use 350 is pretty good for 2025, 11 by 17, and make sure that it's in portrait orientation. Fantastic. Now here's the magic. Honestly, we just drag and drop, and it turns it into a smart object, which is just such a game changer. Right, so let me make that a little easier to see on my screen. Let's minimize some things a little bit. But I essentially take this entire piece, make sure that I grabbed it, and drag it right into Photoshop. As soon as I do that, remarkably, it's even at the same exact scale, as long as I was in that original 11 by 17. Now keep in mind, I forgot to get that little rectangle. Right, so it is kind of like, whoa, bro, is this what you meant? It didn't get that rectangle, but I should have kept it. That way, of course, I can line up to my 11 by 17 again. Now, you'll see the way that it comes into Photoshop, and this is assuming that you've had some practice with Photoshop, by the way. I know I have a habit of just kind of throwing you right into the program. But yeah, welcome to Photoshop. But this is kind of the end of our workflow, if you will. Right, obviously we'd want to get the right line weight, we'd want to get the right drawing, because as soon as I hit enter here, now it's in there. And if you notice, if we zoom in, it kind of got blurry, no? That's because, well, Photoshop is a rasterized program and is no longer an actual true line. In fact, if you go back to Illustrator, you'll notice you can zoom in forever. In fact, they never get blurry, ever. I'm zooming in, by the way. I'm zoomed in so much that, yeah, see, it just never gets blurry because it's a vector program. Whereas the exact same line, as soon as I transfer it, does become a smart object layer, right? So that's super important because, well, you'll notice I no longer have the ability to change anything about it, right? So keep that in mind. But assuming that that was the maybe final color blue and red that I did want to choose, now I could start to edit and manipulate this drawing. You know, for instance, I know that this is a section and that I essentially want a background or maybe some sort of entourage eventually. Now, I will have to end it there for today, but we'll pick up off where we left off, and I may actually fix some things between now and part 2. So anyway, just to recap, because I know we went over a lot in this part 1, is a few things. Obviously, we went over clipping plane, huge one, and the ability to, of course, change those things. We went over making 2D of those clipping planes. We also went over an exploded axon situation. And we went over, of course, setting up before we get back into Illustrator again, reviewing scale a little bit. We went from Illustrator and, of course, changing those line weights. And, of course, our workflow right into Photoshop. So next time we will start to go over some of the unique tidbits that we can do in Photoshop and eventually some of the stuff that we can do with the Wacom tablets. Other than that, at least in terms of clipping plane or anything, guys, any major questions come about during this tutorial? Some of us paying attention, I do appreciate that. Was that a question, Jerusalem? No. Mighty stretch. All right, well, we will end it there for today.